The top floor of the Orion International Business Center overlooked a skyline of shimmering glass towers, where the city's morning sun reflected off countless skyscrapers. Inside the grand conference hall, polished marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, while executives from some of the country's largest companies sat around a massive walnut table. Conversations were quiet, almost cautious. Everyone had heard stories about the mysterious entrepreneur who had transformed a struggling startup into one of the fastest-growing business empires in less than a decade. "Is she here yet?" one executive whispered, nervously adjusting his tie. "They say she never arrives late," another replied, glancing toward the towering double doors. Among the guests sat several former university classmates, dressed in expensive suits and designer dresses. They exchanged confident smiles, assuming today's meeting would simply be another opportunity to expand their careers. None of them imagined that the person they were about to meet would force them to confront a past they had spent years trying to forget. The room suddenly fell silent. "But before those doors open, I have a quick favor to ask. If you enjoy emotional stories about perseverance, justice, and unforgettable life transformations, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves inspiring stories. Also, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your support helps us continue bringing powerful stories like this to you every week. Now, let's find out why everyone in this room has suddenly stopped breathing. The elegant wooden doors opened without warning. A poised woman stepped inside wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue business suit. Her confident stride echoed across the room as every pair of eyes followed her. She carried no unnecessary display of wealth, only quiet confidence, calm authority, and years of hard-earned success. One former classmate stared in disbelief. "Grace?" Another slowly rose from his chair, his face turning pale. "It can't be." The whispers spread through the room like a wave. "That's the woman. The janitor. The girl who cleaned office toilets after graduation." Grace Johnson calmly reached the head of the conference table. She looked around the room, recognizing every familiar face. Some lowered their eyes in embarrassment. Others could barely breathe, overwhelmed by the realization that the woman they had once ridiculed was now the powerful CEO, whose approval they desperately needed. None of them knew that this extraordinary journey had begun years earlier, on the happiest day of Grace's life, her university graduation. The memory carried Grace back to a bright spring afternoon when the campus buzzed with laughter, music, and proud families celebrating graduation. Colorful banners fluttered in the warm breeze between modern university buildings, while cameras flashed across the crowded courtyard. Young graduates embraced one another, convinced that the future was waiting just beyond the campus gates. Grace Johnson walked across the stage with honors, her graduation gown flowing behind her as thunderous applause filled the auditorium. She accepted her diploma with trembling hands, smiling through tears. In the front row, her widowed mother, Evelyn, stood proudly, clapping harder than anyone else. "I always knew you could do it," Evelyn said as they embraced outside beneath blooming trees. "Your father would be so proud of you today." Grace smiled. "This is only the beginning, Mom. I'll find a great job, pay off every debt, and make sure you never have to worry again." For the first time in years, hope felt stronger than hardship. Over the following weeks, Grace polished her resume, attended interviews across the bustling city, and applied to every company she could find. Every morning, she boarded crowded buses before sunrise, carrying a folder filled with certificates and recommendation letters. Every evening, she returned home exhausted but determined. Then the rejection emails began. "We regret to inform you. We've selected another candidate. Thank you for your interest." Weeks quietly became months. The unpaid electricity bill remained on the kitchen table. Rent notices appeared at the apartment door. Evelyn tried to smile through her growing concern, pretending everything would be fine. "We'll get through this," she whispered one evening. Grace nodded, but after her mother went to bed, she stared silently out at the glowing city skyline. Tomorrow, she promised herself, she would keep searching, no matter how impossible it seemed. Little did she know, her next opportunity would come from the one job she never imagined accepting. The following Monday, Grace stood outside one of the city's tallest office towers just before sunrise. Its mirrored glass reflected the pale morning sky as streams of professionals hurried through the revolving doors, carrying briefcases and coffee cups. Grace looked down at the neatly folded Navy janitor's uniform in her hands and took a slow, steady breath. I may not have the job I dreamed of, she whispered to herself, but honest work is still honorable work. Inside, the building manager greeted her with a kind smile. Welcome, Grace. We all start somewhere. Just do your best. She nodded gratefully and began her first shift. Hour after hour, she mopped polished marble floors until they sparkled, emptied overflowing trash bins, wiped fingerprints from glass walls, and quietly sanitized spotless restrooms before employees arrived. She worked with care, believing that every task deserved dignity, no matter how small it seemed. Whenever executives passed by, she stepped aside politely, avoiding unnecessary attention. Still, every elevator door that opened filled her with quiet anxiety. What if someone recognizes me? Days turned into weeks, and she convinced herself that perhaps she had escaped that embarrassment. Then one busy afternoon, the elevator doors slid open on the executive floor. A familiar voice broke the silence. Grace. She froze. Standing only a few feet away were three former university classmates, dressed in tailored business suits with company ID badges hanging proudly around their necks. Their surprised expressions quickly shifted into amused smiles. Is that really you? One of them asked, staring at the cleaning cart beside her. Another looked from her uniform to the mop in her hands and laughed softly. I thought you graduated with honors. Grace tightened her grip on the mop, but forced herself to remain calm. Yes, she answered quietly. I did. The hallway fell uncomfortably silent for a moment, but the mocking smiles spreading across their faces warned her that the worst humiliation was only beginning. Grace stood quietly beside her cleaning cart, the handle of the mop trembling slightly in her hands. The polished hallway, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's busy skyline, suddenly felt impossibly small. Employees passing through slowed their pace, sensing that something uncomfortable was unfolding. One of her former classmates pulled out a phone and smirked. Everyone needs to see this, he said, pretending to admire the spotless floor. Our top graduate ended up cleaning bathrooms. Another laughed loudly. All those late-night study sessions for a mop and a bucket? The group burst into laughter while the phone camera continued recording. Grace lowered her eyes, refusing to meet their gaze. Every word stung, but she knew that arguing would only give them exactly what they wanted. Within minutes, short video clips began circulating online with cruel captions. Graduated with honors. Now cleaning toilets. Dream job achieved. Notifications spread rapidly among old classmates, and mocking comments multiplied. Some strangers laughed without knowing her story. Others judged her life in seconds, never imagining the sacrifices hidden behind that simple uniform. Grace quietly returned to work. She replaced paper towels, disinfected sinks until they gleamed, and carefully mopped every corner of the restroom. A few office employees watched silently. Some looked uncomfortable, while others simply walked away, unwilling to get involved. An older maintenance worker approached her during a break. You don't have to prove anything to people who measure success by titles, he said gently. Grace managed a faint smile. I'm not cleaning for them, she replied softly. I'm cleaning because my mother depends on me. The man nodded with quiet respect before walking away. Grace picked up her supplies and continued her work with steady hands. She had no idea that someone else inside the building had been quietly observing her strength, kindness, and dignity, and that a single unexpected moment was about to change the course of her entire life. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass walls as evening settled over the nearly empty office tower. Most employees had already gone home, leaving only security guards, a few late-night staff members, and Grace quietly finishing her final round of cleaning. The gentle hum of air conditioners echoed through the silent corridors, making the building feel unusually still. As Grace pushed her cleaning cart past the executive lounge, a loud thud shattered the silence. She turned instantly. An elderly businessman had collapsed beside the reception desk, his briefcase lying open across the polished floor. Help, someone shouted. Call an ambulance. Several employees rushed over, but panic quickly spread. Some stood frozen, unsure what to do. Grace dropped her mop and hurried to the man. "Everyone, please give him some space," she said firmly. "Someone call emergency services." "I already have," a security guard replied. Kneeling beside the man, Grace checked that he was breathing and spoke calmly to keep those around her focused. "Sir, can you hear me? Stay with us." The man barely opened his eyes before losing consciousness again. Remembering the first aid training she had completed during university volunteer programs, Grace carefully followed the basic emergency steps she had learned while waiting for medical responders to arrive. She remained calm, reassuring everyone around her until the paramedics rushed into the building and immediately took over. One of them looked at Grace with appreciation. "You kept him stable. Your quick response made a real difference." Hours later, doctors confirmed that the businessman, Daniel Carter, a respected entrepreneur, was expected to recover. When Mr. Carter learned that the young janitor who had helped save his life was a university graduate with outstanding academic achievements, he asked for her employment file. As he quietly read through her qualifications and learned how faithfully she had worked despite every hardship, he realized he wasn't looking at an ordinary cleaner. He was looking at someone whose greatest talents had simply never been given the chance to shine. A week after leaving the hospital, Daniel Carter invited Grace to his spacious office on the top floor of the same glass tower she had spent months cleaning. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, revealing the bustling city below. Grace stood nervously at the doorway, still wearing her neatly pressed janitor's uniform, unsure why one of the country's most respected businessmen wanted to see her. Mr. Carter smiled warmly and slid a folder across his desk. "I didn't ask you here to offer charity," he said. "I asked you here because I believe you've earned an opportunity." Grace looked at the folder. Inside was an offer for a paid internship in the company's operations department. Her eyes filled with tears. "But I've only been cleaning this building." Mr. Carter shook his head. "No, gracias. You've been demonstrating discipline, responsibility, and character every single day. Skills can be taught. Integrity cannot." The following Monday, Grace exchanged her janitor's uniform for simple business attire. She arrived before sunrise, took careful notes during every meeting, and stayed late to understand how each department worked. After work, she spent long evenings studying finance, leadership, and business strategy at the small kitchen table she shared with her mother. "There must always be something new to learn," she often reminded herself. Months became years. Her dedication earned promotions, the respect of colleagues, and eventually the responsibility to lead major projects. Every challenge became another lesson, and every setback strengthened her resolve. When the time finally felt right, Grace took the greatest risk of her life. With years of savings, experience, and Mr. Carter's encouragement, she founded her own company. Guided by honesty, innovation, and respect for every employee, the business steadily grew from a modest office into a thriving enterprise known across the city. Yet even as success surrounded her, Grace never forgot the sound of laughter in those office hallways, or the people who believed she would never rise beyond a mop and bucket. Their paths would soon cross again in the most unexpected way. Several years passed, and the city's business landscape changed dramatically. Economic uncertainty swept through the financial district as companies downsized, investment projects stalled, and once thriving firms closed their doors. Tower cranes stood motionless against the skyline, and long lines of job seekers stretched outside employment centers every morning. Among those affected were the very classmates who had once laughed at Grace. Promotions disappeared, businesses failed, and comfortable careers ended almost overnight. Pride slowly gave way to worry as savings dwindled and responsibilities at home continued to grow. "I've sent out dozens of applications," one former classmate sighed while scrolling through job listings on a laptop. "Nobody's hiring." Another replied, "There's one company still expanding. Everyone says they're opening new offices and recruiting experienced professionals." The company's name appeared on the screen. Johnson Global Solutions. None of them paused to wonder who the founder was. Over the following weeks, resumes poured into the company's human resources department. Recruiters carefully reviewed qualifications, scheduled interviews, and contacted promising candidates. The process was fair, organized, and based entirely on merit. Inside the company's modern headquarters, Grace quietly reviewed reports from her executive team. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, she watched employees arriving with confidence and purpose. The success surrounding her had been built one honest decision at a time, and she never forgot where that journey had begun. Her assistant entered with a folder. "These are tomorrow's final interview candidates." Grace thanked her and casually opened the file. As she turned the pages, several familiar names caught her attention. She paused. Memories of polished hallways, whispered insults, and mocking laughter returned in an instant. For a brief moment, the room fell silent. Grace gently closed the folder and looked out over the city. Tomorrow would bring a meeting none of them could have imagined. A meeting that would test not only their character, but hers as well. The following morning, the reception area of Johnson Global Solutions buzzed with quiet anticipation. Sunlight poured through the towering glass walls, illuminating the elegant lobby where polished stone floors reflected the movement of applicants waiting for their interviews. Among them sat Grace's former classmates, dressed in their best business attire, clutching neatly organized resumes and hoping for a fresh start. "I've heard the CEO is extremely selective," one of them whispered. Another nodded nervously. "If we get this opportunity, it could change everything." A human resources manager soon appeared. "The executive interview panel is ready. Please follow me." The candidates entered a spacious boardroom with a long oak table overlooking the city's skyline. Senior executives were already seated, quietly reviewing documents. The applicants exchanged anxious glances, wondering when the company's founder would arrive. Then the doors opened. Every conversation stopped. Grace Johnson walked into the room wearing an elegant navy blue suit, her calm confidence filling the space without a single word. She greeted the executives with a polite smile before taking her seat at the head of the table. The applicants stared in complete disbelief. One woman's resume slipped from her trembling hands. "Grace," she whispered. Another lowered his head immediately, unable to meet her eyes. The silence felt heavier than any accusation. Finally, one former classmate stood slowly. "We owe you an apology," he said, his voice shaking. "We judged you by your job instead of your character. We laughed when we should have respected your courage. We were wrong." Others quietly nodded. "I'm truly sorry," another added. "If I could change those days, I would." Grace looked around the room, recognizing the regret written across every face. The pain of those memories had never completely disappeared, but neither had the values that carried her through them. She folded her hands on the table and prepared to answer. Not as the young woman they once humiliated, but as the leader she had become. The boardroom remained silent as Grace looked thoughtfully at the familiar faces before her. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the afternoon sunlight bathed the city skyline in warm golden light, a quiet reminder of how much time had passed since the painful days that had shaped them all. Her former classmates waited anxiously, expecting anger, humiliation, or the same cruelty they had once shown her. Instead, Grace offered a gentle smile. "I won't pretend your words didn't hurt," she said calmly. "There were days I questioned my own worth because of the laughter and judgment I faced. But those experiences also taught me something far more valuable." She paused, allowing every word to settle. "There is dignity in honest work. No job that provides for a family deserves shame. What truly defines a person is not the title on a name badge, but the character they show when life becomes difficult." The room grew still. Several applicants quietly wiped tears from their eyes. Grace opened the interview folders resting before her. "Today, I won't judge any of you by the mistakes you made years ago. I will judge you by your qualifications, your integrity, and your willingness to grow." One by one, the interviews began. Candidates who met the company's standards were offered positions based on their abilities. Those whose experience did not match the available roles received practical advice, professional references, and encouragement to continue improving rather than leaving in despair. As the final applicant stood to leave, he stopped at the door. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You gave us a kindness we never gave you." Grace simply nodded. "Make sure you pass that kindness on to someone else." As the boardroom slowly emptied, peace replaced the weight of old memories. Grace knew that true success was never about proving others wrong. It was about becoming the kind of person who could choose compassion when revenge would have been far easier. And with that choice, the final chapter of her journey was ready to begin. As the sun began to set, Grace drove through the familiar streets of the neighborhood where her journey had truly begun. Children played in the small community park, neighbors chatted outside modest apartment buildings, and the golden evening light painted everything with a quiet sense of peace. Although her life had changed beyond recognition, this place still reminded her of the dreams, struggles, and sacrifices that had shaped the woman she had become. She stopped in front of her mother's home and smiled as Evelyn opened the door before she could even knock. "I knew it was you," Evelyn laughed, wrapping her daughter in a warm embrace. "A mother always knows." Inside, the house looked much the same as it had years before. Family photographs lined the shelves, including one from Grace's graduation day. She picked it up gently, remembering the excitement they had shared and the hardships that had followed. "We made it, Mom," Grace said softly. Evelyn squeezed her hand. "No, my dear. You made it because you never let bitterness replace kindness." The next morning, Grace returned to Johnson Global Solutions. As she entered the headquarters, she noticed several newly hired janitorial employees preparing for their first day. Some looked nervous, just as she once had. Instead of walking past them, Grace stopped with a warm smile. "Welcome to the team," she said. "Every role in this company matters. Thank you for the work you're about to do." The employees looked at one another in surprise before smiling back with renewed confidence. Watching them, Grace quietly remembered the young woman who had once pushed a cleaning cart through these same hallways, carrying dreams far greater than anyone could see. The narrator's voice gently closed the story. Life has a way of changing our circumstances, but character is a choice we make every day. Respect every honest worker. Never underestimate quiet perseverance. And remember that the people others overlook today may become the leaders who inspire tomorrow. With that, Grace walked forward through the bright hallway, leaving behind not just a successful company, but a legacy built on dignity, compassion, and hope.